Today is going to be a shorter one as we are going to talk about the SAID principle. SAID, SAID, standing for Specific Adaptation to Imposed Demand. And this is a very basic concept. I'm going to run over it quite quickly and then some other little things that apply to it as well. So SAID principle is today's topic. And when talking about SAID principle, it seems pretty obvious. So it all comes back to the number one training principle, and that is specificity. So your body will adapt to the specific demands you put upon it. So for example, you want to get a better bench press. What does that mean? It means you need to bench more frequently through different ranges or through different rep schemes. You look at the muscles that are in use, primarily chest, shoulders, triceps, you build those and you gear everything towards that. So this is a SAID demand, or this is part of the SAID principle. You are specifically adapting to impose demand for that movement. Then you look on the other side and you think, okay, I want someone to run a 5k or 10k time or improve their time. You're obviously not going to put all your chips in the bench basket. You're going to divide them the other way. So what would that look like? That would mean you'd be running more often. Might have to look at your body composition, your ability to recover between sessions, your heart rate, and specifically gauge everything towards that goal. So that's what I mean when I say it seems obvious. So SAID, I'm going to just shorten it down to SAID from here on in, means that the type of training we use will dictate our response. So the body adapts to specific stress placed on it. Of course, genetics, environment, training adaptations all play a role. So your training age and training history is vital when programming for someone or when considering how they will react to certain movements. So obviously if I have someone that comes into the gym and their usual training is running and they do 5, 10, 15 kilometer runs, or that's what they've been doing for years, you'll be able to tell by their body that that's what they've been doing because that's the demand they've imposed on themselves. Secondly, the considerations will mean, okay, well, these guys mightn't train their type 2 fibers, or they mightn't have that explosive strength. It might be a while before we can build up to these heavier lifts or show these kind of higher end lifts for 80% higher or 90% higher. Considerations is that their recovery between sprints and things like that will be a bit different at the start, and they're going to be a while adapting to that. So again, training history is important, but I suppose that's not what we're talking about today. So I'm going to take two extremes. We've got sprinters and we got marathon running. So let's just say we take two Olympic level athletes, obviously ignoring the fact they're probably all on steroids. You take a sprinter and a marathon runner. So these two at the extremes genetically are predisposed to these perfect genetics that will gear them towards the adaptation they want. So before they start, they probably have a bit of a head start. But at the same time, if they were to train a different way, their body would react a different way as well. So you can see the body type of a sprinter, not stocky, but quite muscle bound. A high percentage of muscle mass is admirable for them and is needed for that explosive strength and that explosive speed. Whereas the marathon runner, less body fat is nearly more important and less weight. So having an extremely muscular frame isn't going to help them as much over that long of a distance. So again, these are just specific demands. So considerations. Training is only one piece of the puzzle when talking about the SAID principle. There's a constant feedback loop. So you apply desired stimulus, adapt to the stimulus, repeat consistently. So it's important that you're able to adapt and repeat. But when I say repeat, I don't mean just do the same thing over and over. I mean repeat the cycle with progression involved. So again, overload and progressive overload, a very important part of the training principles alongside specificity. So nutrition and recovery must be taken into account. You must eat for your specific goal, recover for the specific goals. And recovery can come in the mode of programming, resting, sleeping, appropriate nutrition, and depends on multiple factors. Recovery will allow the adaptation to happen. So that recovery part is very important. And this is something I covered in the GAS theory that we went over, the general adaptation syndrome that I went over in a video a couple of days ago. So the considerations here are twofold, in the sense that everyone, when they talk about SAID principle, they talk about training and training only, but there's a lot more that goes into it. For example, if I'm training to enter a powerlifting meet, of course I'm going to train the 3 lifts and I'm going to focus on those. But what else can I control? My recovery between sessions, how I adapt to different movements, my nutrition, obviously controlling the protein, getting to a certain weight goal, making sure I'm not cutting too fast, making sure I'm cutting slowly. So again, putting these adaptations on the body is important. The principle of accommodation should always be touched on when we talk about the SAID principle. So accommodation is when we adapt to the certain response and are no longer reaping the full benefits of that training modality. So constant stimulus of the same stressors over time will cause diminishing returns. So this is doing the exact same thing. No real progress, no change in variables, no peaks and valleys, for lack of a better word. So everything's just stable over and over. You're kind of doing the same thing. It's going to cause diminishing returns. So accommodation happens at a physical and psychological level. So it can easily be avoided through effective progressions, deload, varied programming, ensuring recovery is taken care of, and avoiding total linear progression in a lot of cases. So when I say psychologically, going in and doing the same thing week in, week out, day in, day out, really can psychologically slow you down even before the physical, I suppose, even before the diminishing returns at the physical level happen. So when I say it can be avoided through effective progressions or effective programming or deloads or varied programming. Varied doesn't mean you got to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It just means small variances can make a big difference in your programming. So for example, if you're on a 3-week cycle or a 4-week cycle of deadlifts, and then all of a sudden, or you start on pause deadlifts and then you move on to deadlifts and then you change to sumo deadlifts and then you change to rack pulls. As long as you're working through certain percentages and working off the same variables, but changing the, I suppose, means to get there, you're still going to get the same adaptation. So a lot of the time, total linear progression isn't as simple as it sounds, where people are just going to linear add reps, add sets, deload a bit, linear add reps, add sets, add weight, and it's going to be as smooth as that. If it was as smooth as that, there would be no need for any of us to have a job. So you got to try and avoid this accommodation, because the deeper you dig yourself here, the harder it is to get out. And when you're trying to impose that specific demand on your body, you need to take everything into account, such as the varied programming and such as the progressions, the deloads, and recovery. Recovery can come in the means of the program as well. So for example, for a lot of GA players off-season working on their heart rate, it's important for them to understand that, or working on their running and their strength, it's important for them that if I give someone on a Sunday, I give someone a 45-minute run and I want them to run at between 130 to 140 beats per minute, and they run at 160 plus and they get a great time. I mean, they get a great workout, but the cost of that is that the next day, Monday, they might have heavy squats, they might have heavy work, and you won't be able to recover as much as maybe you would if you ran at the 130 beats per minute. So when I say include recovery in the programming, I mean the programming should feed into itself, and it should be aware of all the days, and your program shouldn't look like different workouts. It should feed into the next day, the next week, the next phase, and take all of that into account. So that's basic. That's all I'm going to leave it as. And specific adaptation to impose demand. It's a very simple topic. Specific goals need specific training. So back to specificity and how simple it is. If you want big glutes, what does that mean? You should probably glute bridge, hip thrust, build strong hamstrings through knee flexion, hip extension, through mid-range, long range, short range. Build your back extensors. You need to look at exactly what the purpose is, and you need to build around that. So look at the goal, build around it. The next thing I talk about is as a GA player, again, keeping it very simple and relative. Look at the goal. What do you need to get better at? Give time to that. But what I think is a great thing, and what someone told me before, is they said, without comparing yourself, look at what the successful or the great people are doing. So if you look at any of the inter-county GA teams and look at the body shape of them and look at what they're capable of off the ball, on the ball, in the tackle, running wise, look at what they're capable of. Agility wise, be it turning, change of direction, look at all that and kind of say, well, am I headed toward that direction? Is that what I'm doing? Even if you get a chance to talk to them, It's the other things like their food, their recovery, their timing, their training, obviously in the off season, pre-season, training during the season. Like it's very specific, and your body will adapt to that. So this is why I suppose there's a lot of frustration in my industry when people are going out and running 5Ks and 10Ks to prepare for a GA match. Whereas if you look at people who run 5Ks and 10Ks and look at their body shape, it's nothing like that of a GA player. They're two quite different body shapes for the most part. Obviously there's outliers, there always will be, but if you look generally, a lot of people fit inside of a bubble pretty much. So you kind of need to be realistic with yourself and reasonable with yourself and say, is this training getting me closer to my goal, or is it just a workout? Is this a program I'm on that is bringing me to step, or am I just working out for the sake of working out? And of course, if you have specific goals that need specific training, it's not good enough to just work out when you have a specific goal. And that's everything on today's.